Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis reviewing its conclusion, and we are on page 1388. 1388. Aleph Shin Pei Ches. The last section where the Rebbe Rashab is explaining the comparison of the three levels of Makabel, namely moonlight, luminous stone, and eyesight, that they correspond to, in the order of Talmud, Mishna, and though he never explicitly says Mikra on the third one, it's apparent that that's the connection, and we'll talk about that later when we get there. Right now, we began with Talmud and Levana. That the moon, like the Talmud, like the moon, is a recipient from the Chochma of the Mishna, which is based on the Chochma law of the Chochma Tata of the Mishna Tersha B'Peh, which is based on the Chochma law, higher Chochma of Mikra, of the written Torah, Tersha B'Ksav. But on the other hand, it is illuminating the darkness, whereas the sun doesn't shine in the dark. So during the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, all the way through Rabbeinu HaKadosh, or like he said, Rav, Shmuel, Rabbi Yechanan, the light shined. The Chochma law of Atzilus was shining, and therefore, looking into the Psukim and looking into the Mishnah, they were able to have that clarity. But as the generations moved on, and like I said, Nesalma was concealed that Chochma, so now the sages, the Talmudic sages, like the moon, come to illuminate even the darkness where we don't have that clarity, and that's through Talmud Bavli, namely, specifically, Torah Shebal Peh in general, but specifically Talmud Bavli, and that in the process, they're able to access deeper levels from the source, from the root and source that are not revealed in Chochma Gluya. They weren't necessary, actually, because that light was shining. To illuminate the darkness, you need to go deeper, and like he explained, then what is deeper comes down to a lower level, as we've been explaining throughout. This last piece that we've been learning now is the conclusion of that section. And what he says is, so what is the Chochma Yetzira? Meaning that additional contribution, the additional transmission and revelation, or the revelation that comes in Bria Dafka, she said, is the Ayin of Keser, which is even higher than Chochma. Because Chochma itself doesn't create. The power of creation travels through the seed of Chochma. But the power of creation comes from a higher place, and that, the Koyach Ein Sof, what he calls it, and he gave different examples for it. And the last thing we learned was that David HaMelech is Mishabeach. When he praises God, he praises him with physical examples, not with what's going on in Atzilus in the higher levels. He says, he speaks about things like Harim HaGvorim, the tall mountains and the powerful ocean. Why? Because the Isavas of Biyah, the creation of Bria, reveals, like he said, the wonder and the awe of the divine more than Atzilus. Atzilus is Gilei Helam, it reveals the divine attributes. But that God can create something that's completely different than godliness, which is creation, that, the Schachos, that's what's revealed in Bria, Koyach Atzmus. Yet, why is Atzilus then Atzilus and Bria lower level? Because in Atzilus you have Mahus, an experience of the Mahus, like seeing the thing itself. You're seeing the artist himself. In Bria, you see the product of the artist, of the creator, I should say. You see the product of the creator. So therefore, you're only seeing its existence, the idea of Samitzias, but in the existence, you're seeing higher levels, expression. So in other words, when you look at a piece of art that was created by the creator, so you're seeing higher levels that Atzilus doesn't see. But Atzilus, what it does see is the artist himself. And in Bria, we only see the product. And through the product, we come to understand the awe and the wonder of the Haflah of Ein Sof, like we learned. Like he said, so even though it's only Metzias, they are aware, they comprehend, and feel Koyach Ein Sof. especially the. And the final piece what we learned was about the Helam of Chochma, that even though this is specifically in Bria, but Kulam b'Chochma Sisa, he creates everything with a design from Chochma, but in Chochma it's in a state of concealment. In Bekech is in a state of concealment. The truth is, I already summed that up. It's the Ayin is Behelam, and the Atzmus of the Ayin, cannot be revealed in Atzilus. And what is revealed is only Chochma, but in the Nevrayim, Yediyas HaMetzias reveals that which is concealed in Chochma. That was the last piece we learned. As I said, the last section of this paragraph, I'm looking at the end of the paragraph, in the middle of page 1388, we're going to learn now. So now he says, the root of all this, the Sheiresh Inyan, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says, the root of all this, of this concept that we're talking about, on one hand, the revelation of this higher level of power of Atzmus is in the lower state, which means in creation. On the other hand, it travels through Chochma, and we're revealing that which is concealed in Chochma, like we spoke the example of a seed. The seed, without being planted in the ground, or the seed without fertilizing the egg and turning it and conceiving a child, does not create, but it has the power of creation through it. So that travels through it. So he says the root of this is as it's known and explained elsewhere, and was also explained earlier, like this. Sha'oir hu mahava. The Oir Ein Sof, is the force that God uses to create. And what that means is like an artist using a paintbrush. Not that the Oir itself is the creator. The creator is the Boira, or the source of the Oir. But the Oir is what is a Mahavim. That the Oir Me'in HaMoir, just like sunlight carries the sun's power and warmth and heat to the earth, so the divine light carries the divine power of creation to existence. So obviously God could have created the world without Oir. In Samach Vav, he explains reasons we need Oir. Oir makes it something we can understand, we can relate to, we can unpack. Omnam, but he makes it also clear, the power, like he says before by Chochma, Kulam b'Chochma Sisa, everything was made through Chochma, but Chochma is not the creator. Chochma itself can't create. It's a tool, you could say it's a divine attribute, a divine instrument that God uses to create with Chochma. But that's not the creator. The it's not with its own power. Because the Eir is attached or connected and completely only its entire identity is to express godliness. So therefore the koyach ha'atzmus is so-called transferred into it. Just like if someone will say to you, sunlight, does that illuminate the earth, warm the earth? You'll say yes, technically yes, but it's not the sunlight its own, because the sunlight is carrying the sun, the sun's power. Take away the sunlight has nothing. So he says it carries like he says in the Gerasification, only Atzmus, the source itself, has the power to create a yesh, and specifically a yesh that does not feel it has a source. It's literally the idea that we're learning here, that you don't that in a lower entity, in Oir itself, Oir feels its source. Like we spoke before about Atzilus. Atzilus reveals godliness. Bria reveals Atzmus, because it reveals a koyach of Atzmus to create something that's a yesh, that doesn't feel like it has a source. That's what he says in the Gerasification. Even though he's not emphasizing that here, but it's very clear that that's part of the picture here. So you have here both ends, that that dafke the yesh lamata, the bria lamata, reveals that higher level. And this power to create is concealed in the earth, because the earth itself is not a creation. It doesn't have that, and it's only carrying the power of God. Where is it expressed? And it comes revealed when you actually create a yesh ma'ayin. So bottom line is, there's Atzmus, the power to create. Atzmus uses Oir as his divine expression, which will carry the creation. Like someone will say, when the artist uses a paintbrush to paint a piece of art, does the paintbrush paint the art, or does the artist paint the art? Of course it's the artist, but he's using the paintbrush to direct the details, the design, etc. So the paintbrush is only because it's a vehicle and an instrument of the artist. So the Oir is a carrier of the artist's power to create. In the Oir itself, you don't see it revealed until the creation happens. When the creation happens, you realize it's coming from Atzmus, but it's traveling through the Oir. That's the carrier, so to speak. So in that sense, if you bring it back to Talmud, same idea. The Talmud is not revealing its own thing. The Talmud is not like the moon. It doesn't have its own light. The light of the Talmud ultimately is coming from the sun, from Torah Shebiksav, from the written Torah, from the Mishna. That's clear. However, there, the depth of the root and source of that Chochma is not revealed in Mishnah and Mikra. There they have clarity. Through the struggle below, where we try to understand the details and the nuances and the contradictions in the Mishnah, through many questions and answers and arguments and counter-arguments, all of that reveals what is concealed, like in the Oir, the Koyach HaAtzmus, same thing, reveals what is concealed in Chochma, Gluya, from the Ayin of Keser, from the source. Like we said yesterday, like we learned earlier, that God gave us the Torah. He embedded in the Torah all his wisdom and all the depth. The earlier generations, Moshe Rabbeinu, all the way through the Mishnah, they had a clarity, fine. But then when things became unclear, what do? So here, the students, the Tamaroim, the Talmudic sages, they began to probe and study. And with their Mesiras Nefesh, like we learned, and dedication, they began to discover deeper meaning in the Mishnah. Basically, what are they doing? They're accessing, like we said, through their effort and exertion, they're accessing the scribe, the ultimate scribe, the cosmic scribe, the Eibishter himself, the writer of the book. It's like you read a book, and let's say a scholar is able to understand the meaning of the book. Fine. But the next generation doesn't understand the meaning. So what do? So by struggling and exerting yourself in understanding, you're basically going back into the mind of the scribe, of the author of the book, and revealing that which was what he put it in the words of the Torah, but it's concealed. And you're revealing the deeper meaning of all those words, basically by accessing the author himself. That's why we learned earlier, Mepi Sofrim, that the rabbis, the sages are called Sofrim, scribes, because they're accessing so-called the scribe, the Eibishter himself, higher than Sefer and Sipur, more than what is the book, what is revealed in the book itself and the very narrative that's related. They're going back to the root of the author of the book, which is essentially what a good Talmud does. A student, Talmidei Yeshem Mikulam, we say, a student accesses a deeper dimension of his teacher more than what was revealed initially. And that's the comparison here. And the Sheirish Ayin is Oyer and Atzmus to understand this picture. Here again, you see that this is how he's explaining the Mamata Lamaila in the Mamata Lamata of Torah itself. He doesn't speak here about darkness in the context of golus or pain or suffering or the Baal Tshuva, like we discussed yesterday. Because here he's still talking the Hamshachah Mamai Lamata Torah, but in Torah itself, we need to reveal it in a dark world. And this is the process. So that's the comparison of Moon to Talmud, which brings together everything we've learned till here. And with that, we conclude the paragraph. Before we move on, let's stop if anybody wants to ask anything or clarify anything. All good? Okay. So now we move to the next mashal of Makabel, the luminous stone. So you may recall, luminous stone is different than the moon. Luminous stone, he says, absorbs and retains the light of the sun or the stars to the point that it glows. It glows in the dark. But it's not called a ma'ir. It's not called a source of light. So he's now going to use that example to explain Malchus of Yetzira. Because till now we've been talking about Malchus of Bria, Malchus of Yetzira. But this, as I pointed out a number of times, can be a little confusing because on one hand, we're going now into a lower world, Yetzira. On the other hand, we'll see it's more revealed in a certain way because Mishna, the revelation is higher than is clearer than the revelation in Talmud. Talmud requires finding it in the darkness, the light. Mishna is already clarity that was received from the Mikra. So let's understand, and he's going to compare that to the luminous stone, which again is based on Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, especially the Mittler Rebbe, on the pasuk Ve'einenu me'ires, Kishemesh ukirech, which we shall discuss also later. So that is essentially the next section, which we're going to learn now. Okay, so the new paragraph on page 1388. Va'moshel de Even Tov. So the second moshel was the moshel of the Even Tov in Hebrew means a good stone, but Even Tov means a luminous stone, like a gem, sometimes called avonim tovis and margolias. You'll say precious stones and the pearls. But in this context, we're talking about Even Tov, like he says, like we learned, a stone that glows, has that ability to glow. Hu b'chinas Malchus the Yetzira. That's the level of Malchus the Yetzira. As he said on the top of page 1386, and takes us back to the original point when he started talking about this on page 1364. In his bar, and we learned on page 1353, the light that sparkles or shines from the glowing stone, the luminous stone, not its own air. It's not like a stone has the power to give off light. This stone has properties that absorbs the light of the sun. So nikna from the word kinyan, it like acquires and absorbs and retains light from the shemesh or from the stars. We spoke about this earlier, about how it's understood in contemporary science, but I believe it is understood that way, that there are things that absorb. Like you see today, there's even synthetic materials that in the sun, like during the day, the sun, like they get recharged in the sun, and at night they will shine, but it's with solar energy. So we see the concept. So these stones are obviously not synthetic, they're not man-made. We're talking about actual natural stones that have that property. Not all stones have that property. So it's so the light is retained, but it's not its own. It's coming from the sun or the stars. And this is similar, as an example, to Mishna in Yetzira. Why? Then is bar le'il, because it was explained earlier, the halachas the Mishnah begins gilu era Chochma. The halachas in the Mishnah, we're talking now from the perspective of the teachers of the Mishnah, the Tanoim, the Mishnaic scholars, sages, like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and his colleagues. So we know for them, there was a clarity. The Chochma that was passed on generation after generation from time of Moshe Rabbeinu in an undiluted way, they had that clarity. So there's the Gilui Eira Chochma. Unlike Talmud, where initially the Gilui Eira Chochma is concealed. V'nizboyer, and was explained, Shezeu Gilui B'chinas Atzmus HaChagas. We learned this is coming from the core of Chagas of Atzilus. In other words, in its root, where is the Mishnah in Yetzira rooted? In Chagas, because as we learned, Chagas Zah, Mekanano, nests in Yetzira. So in that sense, so the root of Mishnah is Chagas, Atzmus Chagas, but Atzmus, not a not what he said before, not only external level, the very core of Chagas radiates in Mishnah. Well, Lias the Midis, all this we learned earlier at the bottom of page 1366, if you want to look it up. Remember, Mides, unlike Moichin is more to yourself. When you understand something, doesn't necessarily, it's not related to other people. Midas, by definition, means a relationship. So Midas, even if it's your Midas, but it's already how you're relating to existence. So you say Chesed means that you love. God is loving, or because of Chesed, because of his love, he wants to create existence. It's a form of Shachas ala Elamis. So in Atzilus itself, Chabad would be more removed, and Chagas relates to Elamis like the Mishnah, which takes the ideas of the written Torah and relates it to the 6 different midas, like we learned the 6 different orders, all the prate, the detailed halachas that can tell us to make it into an active, an actionable book that we can follow the laws. Al ken yochel liyas gili b'chinas chagas. So the level of Chabad we learned, there cannot be revealed in its full intensity, because it's removed from existence. So the only way it's revealed is its outer dimension, like we learned Mikra, the stories, the mitzvahs without the details and explanations. Mishna, however, is rooted in a level in godliness that already relates to existence. So that can be revealed, so to speak, in full glory. So that's Chagas as it manifests in Yetzira. Mashenka b'chinas Chabad, as I just said, shezeo b'chinas Talmud. Okay, now he's saying Chabad as Talmud, Chabad of Nihi. Because remember, Chabad is more of an understanding than Mishnah. Mishnah doesn't have this level explanation of Talmud. Ein above is galus. So that does not come into a level of his galus until, that's why it's concealed, until the sages, the Talmudic sages, work hard and start revealing it. But on its own, it's somewhat removed. Aval Chagas bo begili. Chagas comes in a revealed way. I know this needs to be explained because we learned earlier Chabad is the root of Mikra. But he made a clear distinction. Chabad of Mikra is in its root. Mikra itself is not in a state of Chochma bin Das. You don't understand Mikra that well. It's very cryptic and very brief. So Chabad, understanding of Chabad is in Talmud. But Mishnah has more the core of the divine revelation. That's why they had that clarity. But the Gili is in the world of Yetzira. Now, why is it like a luminous stone? So he says like this: This is like the example of a glowing stone. So there's light. You see the stone; it's shining. And what light is it? Is the light of the sun and the light of the stars. Now he doesn't go into detail here, but based on what we learned earlier, what you have to say is the following: that the moon, the distinction between the moon and the luminous stone is that the moon, just trying to think if this is the explanation. Because based on what he's saying here, he's saying that the moon does not have a light that is retained. In other words, you see days in the month when the moon disappears. And there are parts of the moon that are not absorbing the sun. Whereas here it absorbs it, but it's not its own. So he's trying to compare the stone, the shining stone, to the Mishnah. So on one hand, it is stronger than the moon, more revealed, but on the other hand, it's not its own light, as opposed to the moon, which comes through its own power. Once the sun triggers it, and therefore it's like the Mishnah. I'm not so clear. I'm trying to think back how I explained it the first time. in the comparison of the two. Give me a moment. Let me look back when he first started talking about this. Well, on a very basic level, it's like this. The Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, Chochma law, is like the sun. It's Er Mashpia. That light has two types of effects. One is on a luminous stone. That would be like the Mishna that's receiving that light, but in a very direct way, in the sense that it absorbs it and it shines. It's not its own light, because the Tanoim, they received ish mi pi ish, like the luminous stone that receives the light from the sun. The moon is another reality. The moon shines in the dark. That's its purpose, to illuminate the dark. Like we learned, the luminous stone, even though it glows in the dark, but it doesn't illuminate the dark. It glows. You could see at night, you could see a shining. You see a green hue or blue or whatever the color is. So the moon, on one hand, is less, but on the other hand, stronger, because it's illuminating the dark. On the other hand, the moon is an Oyer Atzmai. Yes, it's coming from the sun, but once it comes from the sun, the moon turns it into moonlight. And like the Amoraim, is their effort, is their seichel that's revealing the deeper dimensions of Chochma, the Ayin of Chochma, like we learned, the deeper, the root of Chochma. Whereas a stone doesn't have any of that. A stone is simply a reflection of the moon, not like a mirror necessarily, but it has more of that direct connection. So Mishna is like a reflection of Ish Mipi Ish, all the way from the Mikra, from the Mashpia. Whereas the moon is more complex, because it's illuminating the dark and therefore revealing deeper dimensions, and it's coming with its own effort, so to speak. And that's why indeed it's called a moir. It's a luminary. Yes, it's a moir that doesn't have light of its own until it's triggered and stimulated by the sun. Like the Amoraim, they need the Mishna and the Mikra to learn what they're learning, but it comes through their effort. Whereas the stone, the luminous stone, there's no effort at all. The luminous stone is simply reflecting the sunlight in a direct way. That's like Mishna and Yetzira. I think that's the basic explanation here. Before I go to the parentheses, are there any questions? Okay. So now he adds in parentheses some, I guess, another nuance here, another detail. He says it's like this: V'yesh Evan Teiv Shameya B'derech Er Yashar. He's going to distinguish between two types of luminous stones. One is one that radiates B'derech Er Yashar, and one radiates B'derech V'yesh Misneitzitz Shemisneitzitz B'Tnua Ano V'Ano. So one is Er Yasha, means once it's retained, the luminous stone is a very stable. You look at it, it's always glowing. But another one that's more sparkling, it like glows on and off. I'm not sure what the name for it is in English, but there are luminous stones that are like that. They go on and off. They're like, they flicker, is the word I was looking for. And based on what do they flicker? They're based on Shemisneit B'Tnua Nova Ano. So Misneitzis means like they sparkle or they flicker Anova Ano, like here and there. back and forth. The tenua, like a movement back and forth. That's commensurate or according to how they're absorbing or how they're retaining the light of the stars. I don't know if I looked it up scientifically how it works, but basically what he's saying is that there's a stone that just it retains it, and that's it. It shines. And another one that's glowing back and forth. Why is he mentioning this? I remember when we first learned it the first time, a few years ago, I think I speculated that the reason he's mentioning it because probably in the Mishna, in the Nimshal, in the moral, probably also have these two examples. You may recall, we learned that even though the Mishnah is the clarity that comes generation after generation, but there are things in the Mishnah that also the Tanoim, even Rabbeinu HaKadosh had to figure out. They had to gather it together. So it could be he's hinting to the fact that even in the Luminous Stone, there's also different levels of how it retains. But it's still all in the category of an Even Tov. He says, so probably I want to look it up in the source and see if I can find more information on this. But that's what he adds in the parentheses. Okay. Now, before we continue, let me give a little introduction. Next section is, this goes a good few pages till 1398. So we're talking about 10 pages, which I'm going to try to be more concise and not necessarily read everything, unless it just becomes impossible. But it's going to all be about this, the comparison of Bria and Yetzira. Because here we have ourselves a paradox. And then after 10 pages, he goes back to the eyesight, which is actually the operative example that is most important in the bigger discussion of Teira of the eye, but we'll get to that when we get there. Paradox. On one hand, Bria, we know, is higher than Yetzira. The order is Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and then Asiya. On the other hand, he's saying here that that Bria on its own is dark. Like the Talmud, it starts in darkness, and then we find light, like the night, and then the moon comes and shines in the night. And Yetzira is Gilui, Mishna. It's a higher Gilui than Bria. So what's going on here? Why is Bria then higher than Yetzira? It will make sense the other way around. That after Atzilus would come the level of Mishna that reveals the light of Atzilus to a lower level, like Mishna, and then you come to a darker state. And then you need the effort of the sages, the Talmudic sages, to reveal light there. But here, Bria is the first, is higher than Yetzirah. So he's going to basically explain, as we're going to learn inside, that indeed, even though Bria is higher, but it's a darker state, and Yetzirah is lower, but it's a more revealed state. And he's going to explain and reconcile this seeming paradox. That's the next section here. It's relevant to the bigger picture. Here's the reason. Remember, we're talking about the interface between the divine and existence. In this context, through Torah, L'mayla Lamata. So Torah is meant to come to illuminate and guide us the right path, how to live our lives in this world, how to fulfill and align our lives with God's will and God's design and God's plan. The challenge is that God created a world of darkness. So Torah doesn't just easily do this. So in Hanami, we have a written Torah, tells us the directives. Then you have a Mishnah that spells it out in more detail. And then you have Talmud that really allows us to understand it even when we don't have all the revelation that the earlier generations had. Okay. But if you recall, all these steps are necessary because we want it to be integrated. Hashem didn't want, God didn't just want to shine a light and say, that's it, I'm giving you light. He wanted our Avodah. He wanted us to take the Torah, work it through, internalize it, understand it, apply it to every given situation in life, That's what we do. When we learn Torah, and we're mevader halachas, and we clarify, is this kosher, is it not kosher? Is this allowed, is this not allowed? What are we really doing? We're taking the light that God gave us, and we're probing and deliberating to try to see and apply it to every given situation. So every time we have a question, is this a kosher piece of food? Are you allowed to eat this? You're allowed to do so and so on Shabbos. And all the laws that we which is essentially the process of us taking the elokus of Torah and looking how to figure out how to internalize it in our lives. So in that process, Mikra is, so to speak, the written book, the written Torah. However, it doesn't have all the explanations necessary for us to be able to do that. Mishna is an extension of that. It's still a gilui, but it's a gilui in dinim, halachas, the details that it derives from the verses of the written Torah. Talmud is a situation, like I said, where it's not clear, and we have to clarify it. So in truth, what's happening here is that all three of them are all part of a process of internalizing Torah and creating the interface between God and ourselves in the fullest possible way, not just as a gift from above, but also something we have gained. It's like literally like a teacher and a student. The teacher teaches his ideas, but then the student has to internalize it, has to absorb it, digest it, and make it their own. When we educate our children, when we educate our students, when we get educated, it's literally a process of transformation based on what we're receiving. So there are things that we receive in a very clear way. Great. There are things that are not clear. And that's where we need to probe and we need to work hard to try to figure it out, which is essentially the story of life. The story of life is you teach your children as best as you can. Then as they grow into adults, they're going to have to figure out things that you may not have taught them. Or you taught them the general principles, even at best, and they have to figure out how to apply it to a situation that is that was not there before. I just recently literally had I'll just give a very practical example. I was dealing with a couple having a lot of problems with fertility and children and a lot of challenges, many miscarriages, so it takes a big toll emotionally, psychologically on people. You start giving up and your whole life becomes like a constant ups and downs and roller coaster. Ultimately, thank God they had a child, a healthy child, great. But they came to me to help them work through they constantly started bickering and they had their own fights. And you know what happens when you get emotionally strained, emotionally very fragile. So there's a lot of issues. So when I was dealing with them, they were very fine people. But like everybody, we all have a breaking point, You push someone too far, it's not so easy. But I knew them to some extent, but I got to know them more as we spoke. And I came to realize they both had very good parents. But their parents, their lives were very blessed. They had money. They were pretty, a lot of gifts without any struggles. There weren't many struggles in their lives. Nobody has no struggles, but not comparable. And I remember thinking to myself, and I said this to them, I said, whatever you're going to build and find deeper resources, it's ultimately because you grew up in a home where you were loved and you were cared for and you were validated and you have built confidence. Now we have to find those resources. I remember after they had the child, so one of them, both of them got up and they spoke and they thanked their parents. They said, even though we did not go through like this when we were children, but it's the strengths that we gained from our parents that gave us the resilience and gave us resources that now we've discovered. So very many times, and I'm sure everybody in their life may have examples of this, that you may not have had this very experience in your earlier life, but you come to realize that like a soldier, you train well, so when the war breaks out, you have the resources you need. But you don't see that earlier, always. And here it's just, I was just thinking of it because it's a very good example, a very balbatish, practical example of what we're talking about here. That when we struggle in life and we discover in Torah direction, so even though we may not have heard that directly from a teacher or from a Rebbe or from our parents, But the truth is, what they gave us had it embedded in it. But you needed to go through your struggle to access it. And then you realize, something, it's not my own. I'm not a self-made person. I did get it from there. But you do get the credit because you're the one that struggled. You're the one that brought it out. You're the one that manifested it. So it's like somewhat of an example of like Talmud Vasik Osel Lechadash Nitla Moshe Messinai, that the Ur ultimately comes from the Mashpia, but God wanted it to be in a way that we draw it out and we struggle with it and we try to figure it out. Just trying to bring this down because this can be so esoteric at times and abstract, just to bring it down into a practical way that what this means in our personal lives. So in that context, that's all the different levels, Mikra, Mishna, and Talmud are simply, they're basically three levels of this connection. Mikra is more like the sun shining to us, even though, as I said, Mikra may be more like the eye, but for now practical purposes, Mashpia. Then there's the Mishnah that receives from that, but with clarity. Then there's the Talmud that you don't have the clarity, but through our effort and work, we achieve even a deeper clarity, and we're revealing strengths, revealing the ayin of Chochma, the root of it, that was not revealed in the Mishnah and the Mikra on its own, even though it's embedded in there in a concealed way. So it's like accessing deeper strengths in the seed of Chochma that's not always revealed in the Chochma itself. But now, so as I said, this is a small introduction that I wanted to give before we get into this discussion of the Bri Yetzira, the Talmud Mishnah interaction, which is very relevant in how that moves over from Mishnah, which is still like the stone reflecting the sunlight, and Talmud, which is like the moon, which is creating its own light in order to illuminate the darkness. Though it's still receiving from the sun, obviously, but it's in a different form or fashion. This is a small introduction. We're going to start learning it. I see we're ready 10:30, so I'm going to start learning it tomorrow, but just wanted to give this introduction. So the next section is going to be like it says, It's going to ask this question that if your Bria is higher than Yetzira, so why does it say Yetzer Oyer, that Oyer, revelation relates to Yetzira and Cheshach relates to Bria? We're going to have an interesting conversation about revelation and darkness and all that comes with that. But I gave somewhat the broader picture in the Torah Oyer interface of Torah Er, which is the bigger theme of this whole section, really till the conclusion of Ayin Beis. So we'll stop here. Anybody want to comment, questions, anything? I hope this last piece gives it a little more, should I say, makes it more palpable or palatable or both. Anybody?
I'd like to say something, Rabbi. I just wonder, in your example of the couple and the parents and all of that, do you get extra credit if you have to figure the stuff out on your own?
You mean like more reward? You get more reward?
Well, no, I don't mean that. Like you're talking about how when you have to dig deeper, if you weren't given, they had to dig deeper because they weren't faced with those challenges. But then they realized that they got certain things from their parents that enable them to.
Let me put it this way: the extra credit you're talking about, how I would define it, above all, is you become a transformed person.
Right.
If you didn't struggle, and it's just a gift, forget about whether you appreciate it entirely, but it's not you. I mean, I know the hours I struggled in trying to understand a Farbrengen from the Rebbe, for example. I can't even describe how hard it was, because it was also working mostly completely from memory. Didn't even have a reference point. But the struggle changed who I am today. I have no doubt a lot of what I do today is a result of my struggle, not just because I heard a good thing and I had a good head and I was able to, just get it. It was because I worked hard at it, and it was real exertion. Like literally, when you bang your head in the wall, anyone who's a writer knows that. There are times you just come to a point you can't get until you really, and you have to work hard. And then finally there's a breakthrough. Now what that breakthrough happens is it becomes yours. meaning it's still your teacher's, it's coming from your teacher, but you become a changed person. I mean, that is ultimately the ultimate. Besides all the other benefits, I mean, the ability, let's say, to be able to answer questions that you did not hear from your teacher, but the methodology you absorbed, that's all part of that transformation. That's how I would, word the what happens through the challenges of life. I use now intellectual example, but the same thing is with emotional challenges and psychological ones. People have gone through kinds of real difficulties, tragedies, unfortunately, or other things like that. I'm talking about obviously when you get through it, not when a person is in the throes or in the in the mouth of the belly of the abyss. That's when it's very, very hard. But ultimately, when you come through it, there is a certain refinement and wisdom that you can never have gained without going through that. I mean,
is that why we're supposed to thank Hashem for all the challenges, just like we thank Him for all the blessings, the revealed blessings?
That's probably part of it. I'm sure that's part of it. It's also the blessing, remember, is not just about God needs our thank you. It's also for us to think positive, that even when you're going through a difficult thing, knowing that ultimately there's no such thing as a dead end, and there's no such thing as a black hole. That there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So it's also for us, when we thank, we're not saying, oh, I thank you because I'm suffering. We're saying the suffering is not the end of the story. There's more to the narrative. There's more coming. There's the descent will bring a greater ascent. See what I'm saying? So it's not just a matter of, it's not letting us fall into resignation and despair. That's how I would put it.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yitzchak, welcome.
I'm back.
I haven't heard your voice in a long time.
Yeah, I've been on vacation, but I have been following the classes. I missed yesterday's, but because I was in transit. But on this issue of Yigia and striving, making an effort, and relative to Ora Ria, which I think corresponds with Mikra, but then the asid level, the Inyan is that the eye will see godliness itself without siwa, without the assistance of aids like Mikra or these things, Mishna, Gemara.
It'll be so internalized, right? It'll see it itself, yeah.
Right. So, nevertheless, though, you would think it's a little bit of a paradox. On the one hand, it'll be self-apparent, I guess, as a result of prior striving and effort you get. On the other hand, it's intrinsic. You won't have to make an effort. So you would think that the deepest perception of godliness and reality would take the greatest amount of yigia. On the other hand, somehow, I guess, most Mashiach, it will be obvious. It'll be, it'll be lechatchila, but from ab initio.
Yeah, that came through thousands of years of struggle.
So okay, that's the idea of we're building on the top of the yigia of all the generations for us.
Absolutely. Look, think of it like a exercise of your muscles. At the end, let's for argument's sake, you've achieved maximum performance. Your muscles are toned, conditioned, but it took years to get to that point. And then that's why I'm saying that it transforms you on a microcosmic level. When you struggle and you start, let's say, internalizing chassidus to the point that you really know how to express it because it's become so much one with you, that doesn't come easily. When you see someone do that, rest assured, there's a lot of work that went into it.
Yeah, I see. Well, beautiful. Thank you.
I mean, you could apply it to anything. Let's say, I don't know how many years you're an attorney, right? It's not like when you began, when you were still in law school, you were just beginning to learn these ideas until it becomes you to the point where, there's the area, I'm talking about the areas where your expertise, it's just like, it's inseparable. And someone will say, how do I get there? You'll say, it's going to take, you have to pay your dues, right?
Yes, 100%. Perfect.
We'll talk about this a lot more when we get to Er Hariyah. But you have to remember, we're not by Eirariya yet. We're not even that higher level of Eirariya. We're still talking here the level of trying to get the Eir of Mikra Mishna into our systems.
Yeah,
And
the
Talmud
Siwa.
is like, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Robin, I liked your question. The Chassidus applied part of it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Isaac.
You
I'm
really
always
need
trying.
to have it here. You really need to have these explanations, because when you learn this, it's so I don't say esoteric necessarily, but it's so abstract in a way. It's not,
Ethereal.
yeah, because it's, you start saying, what is this? How's it relevant to my life? This whole Talmud Mishnah thing. But really, that's what it comes down to, because he's doing it through Torah now. And we'll talk later about how that mixes with Tefillah, Mamata Lamayla. I also just mentioning again, I'm writing it all up. I'm writing it up with a whole, what we learned from the other Maimorim. I'm going to write it in Hebrew. We're going to probably publish it somewhere.
That's very exciting. Like a book almost.
That's great.
Yeah, it's going to be more like an essay. I'll probably do it in several parts.
That's extremely exciting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so let's
Are
stop
you
here. As
doing
I
that?
said,
Sorry, I'll ask afterward. I'll ask after you turn the recording off.
as I said, next week, just to give you my travel plan, I am Monday and Tuesday, I'll be in Minneapolis, so there won't be a class. So tomorrow there's a class, Sunday a class, Monday, Tuesday off, Wednesday back, and then the next week again, I'll be both in St. Louis one day and in Portland, Oregon another. So keep you posted. Okay, let's stop here. Bottom of page 1388.